It was at the transmitter, the AM transmitter, which was up on a mountain about 5 miles up a dirt road. I drove up there, got to the gate. I saw no building. And I thought, this is a wild goose chase that guy sent me on. Then I noticed an empty spot with a stairwell going down into the ground. And I heard music coming out of it. So I walked down, and Dusty Rhodes was on the air. I said, this is where we're working? She said, yeah, until they put the FM on the air, then, we'll be there. It was a bunker. Talk about underground radio. That was it.
And that is voiceover talent and radio personality Bob Gowa. If you want to check out his website, just go to bobgowa.com. Last time we were talking about the Mighty Met KMET, or as they used to say, a little bit of heaven, 94.7 Tweedledee. Now, Bob described the KMET Air Studio, which has been talked about for years by both former DJs as well as those who visited the station.
It was a very tiny studio where the DJs were. The room was lined with albums, and the walls were that old-style acoustic tile with little holes punched in it. Mm-hmm. I think they had asbestos. They don't use them anymore. But somebody had come in and painted the whole wall, the ceiling, all those acoustic tiles were dark blue with nighttime sky scene, stars and comets. And it was very cool. It was a nice place to be.
Wow. And what about your room, the control room itself? Was that larger or smaller? And did it have
was bigger. It was purely utilitarian. It was a master control room. The jocks had control of the turntables. They had a cart machine that they could use to play songs or drops, and a microphone. On the other side, we controlled the master volume coming out of that studio, and we aired the commercials in the control room. It was a throwback to the old union days.
Wow. How often did musicians come to visit KMET?
Just now and then. Somebody like Grace Slick would come in and on somebody's invitation. I remember Grace because I was there that day. But it wasn't an everyday thing. But it wasn't unusual either.
Any other musicians stand out that came to visit?
Not in my memory because of the hours that I worked. It was the afternoon, and I worked 4 hours, and I was out of there. So I didn't get to see a lot of musicians, but a lot of people came by after their shows at night.
I remember Jim Ladd in his book had written about talking about how the DJs would oftentimes listen to each other's shows. When you were off the air, how often would you have KMET on your dial listening?
Oh, you're not going to like this answer. I almost never listened to the station I worked for. Just because I thought, I know what I'm going to hear. I know what they do. And I appreciated all kinds of music. So I could be listening to a top 40 station or the classical station or jazz. KBCA was a great jazz station. Mm-hmm. And I was a news person, so I would spend a lot of time listening to that.
Yeah, like KBC Talk Radio 79 or KPCC.
Or KPFK.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that was my first ever radio station, first one I worked for.
Yeah, tell us about Pacifica, because that was during the early days of that operation.
I was on the board one morning. Remember how the SLA left their tapes at KPFK? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got one of those. So it was during those years, the 70s. There was a knock at the door, the back door. I heard it. I went back, opened the door, and there was a package on the ground. Everybody, whoever was there, had split. But, those were exciting times.
Oh, goodness. And then after KMET, you went to KROQ for middays. Tell us about how you got that job, because it looked like on the resume that you were moonlighting at both KROQ and the Mighty Met for a couple of months there.
No. And a lot of what you'll read about those days in LA radio and a lot of what you'll read about me is a little off. I left KMET. I lived in San Diego after that for about a year, came back to L.A., and I was working at a place that Shadow Stevens owned. It was a studio, production studio. Did a lot of commercials. It's sitting there once, a guy walked in, and I wasn't introduced, but we chatted briefly. He was there to talk to Shadow. And after he left, Shadow turned to me and said, "So what do you think of Gary Bucosta?" Says, "Is that who that was?" "Yeah." "Oh, nice shark skin suit." Now I've met Gary Bucosta. I didn't have much of an impression. Gary called me at home that night. I assumed Shadow gave me my phone number. He said, "We're putting KROQ back on the air, and we're having a meeting tomorrow. All the jocks are going to be there. I'd like you to be there." "Oh, okay." Gary didn't have a good reputation at that point, you know. But I thought, yeah, it sounds interesting. So I went. It was at a hotel where Gary was living. I walked in, and there were a bunch of young, long-haired hippie freaks like me. And Gary and Mike Schweinsberg, who would be the program director. Dusty Rhodes was there. And I went in not knowing why I was there. And they never really offered me a job. They assumed I would be there. And they wanted me to do middays. I thought, okay, well, I'm not, sure, why not? I was just looking for a good story, right? Mm-hmm. So I had to talk to Shadow first because I knew he had been involved with KROQ, and I didn't want to step on anybody's toes, certainly not his toes. But I told Gary I would do it, for now. And he told me where to go. The studio was no longer in Burbank. It was at the transmitter, the AM transmitter, which was up on a mountain about 5 miles up a dirt road. I drove up there. I knew which transmitter was theirs just because I was, wired into the engineering world. Mm-hmm. I drove up there, got to the gate, let myself in, drove in, closed the gate, looked around. I saw the 6 towers. I saw no building. And I thought, this is a wild goose chase that guy sent me on. Then I noticed an empty spot with a stairwell going down into the ground. And I heard music coming out of it. So I walked down, and Dusty Rhodes was on the air. And I said, "This is where we're working?" She said, "Yeah, until they put the FM on the air, and then, we'll be there." It was a bunker. Jeez, you talk about underground radio. That was it. So I went on the air that night, and it was insane. You had to run across the room and shut down the ventilation before you turned the mic on because it was too loud, and it was just crazy. And after that, I told Mike Schweinsberg that I would do this until Friday. I'd do it for a week, so I don't want to leave you guys in the lurch. But that's it. I'm not coming up here every night. And that's what I did. I did it for a week, and then no more. They called me when they were ready to put the FM on, and I did it. I went to the FM studio in Pasadena Hilton and worked there for almost 2 years.
Yeah, where in the Pasadena Hilton was the studio?
It was on the top floor was a disco, and we were right underneath it, whichever floor that was below.
Wow.
And you could hear them dancing. In fact, it shook so much, sometimes the tone arm would come off the record and skip across. We thought about, maybe I should play a disco record and try to sync it up with the beat. It was a beautiful place to work. And if we called and ordered room service, they'd bring it to us. And never charged us. Never charged us. They charged the station. In fact, when we moved out to a studio across the street, I think the room service bill may have played a role in that.
Oh. Now, when you were on KROQ those 2 years, How much of it was free form and how much of it was, a playlist that you were given?
It's totally free form. Totally free form. I went into the studio and I asked the program director, okay, what's the format? He said, well, you play a record and then you play another record and, you can say KROQ and play another record. Okay, I can do this. I've been waiting years for somebody to say this to me, and it was a blast.
Wow, that's great. And then after KROQ, you went to KWest 106
yes.
for also middays. Tell us about how you got there.
I had a friend in the record promotion business, a dear friend, who knew the program director at KWest. Things were starting to get a little too weird for me at KROQ, and they were changing the music, and I just felt like I really needed to get out of there and find a real radio station. And my friend talked to the PD at KWest and came back to me with an offer. Call the guy. And I did, and he hired me. The two easiest jobs I ever got were KROQ and KWest.
My dad told me that KROQ and KWest were the same company, but that's not the case, correct?
No, never was.
Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't think so, but...
KWest was owned by a company out of Chicago, a pair of brothers. They were in the insurance business, and they had these radio stations. Century Broadcasting. KROQ, on the other hand, was... we didn't really know who owned it. It was run by a couple of guys, who lived in a hotel. Very different.
Wow. What stations did Century own in Chicago?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that. I want to say No, I can't. I can't tell you because I don't. Yeah, they owned ABX in Detroit and KC in St. Louis. They had KWest, the Chicago station, and they bought the old KFRC FM, which became KMEL.
Wow.
Yeah, which was my next station after KWest.
Yeah. Well, first tell us about the format of KWest 106 and some of the DJs you got to work with there.
It was a basic format. You were supposed to play a song from the yellow file and then a song from the green file and so on. And the jocks there, when I got there, Bob Taylor, Charlie Kendall, Rich Dalton did overnights, and Dan Carlisle, too. Danny had come in from Detroit. And when I left, it was a completely different thing when I left KWest. They had changed the format. They were playing a lot of glam rock. Tom Yates had come over from KLOS. He was the program director. Tom fired me, as well he should have, because I didn't like what they were becoming, and I didn't know that music. But not long after that, the guy from the company called and said, you ever thought about living in San Francisco? I said, only all my life. And they brought me up here to do mornings at KMEL.
Cool. And what was the format for KMEL?
It was AOR, formatted album rock.
So it's very
just
similar, like KWest. Okay, so you kind of have like the green category, the yellow category, etc.
Yeah.
As far as the music was concerned.
Right.
At KWest and KMEL, how many times did you get to do concerts, like introduce artists on stage? Since you were a midday DJ, they would afford you the chance to, do an evening concert.
Yeah, I didn't. I didn't do that at KWest and KMEL. I did that much later on. I was at KSAN. KSAN was no longer a rock station. I found myself doing country.
Wow.
And I did a bunch of concerts. Every major artist came through town, and I would MC the shows. I didn't mind doing country. I didn't know anything about it at first, but I figured it out. And it's just it's pop music for a different crowd.
Oh yeah.
But doing country radio was not all that foreign to me.
We're talking with radio DJ, program director, and voiceover talent Bob Gowa. And next time we conclude the interview with some of his program directing jobs, as well as more stories about Gary Owens, Johnny Magnus, and Bill Balance.